Kate Harris always knew she wanted to travel from small-town Ontario to Mars. Along the way, she ended up on an epic journey on the fabled Silk Road. A Rhodes Scholar, Kate Harris writes about how borders make and break the world in her debut book, Lands of Lost Borders, Out of Bounds on the Silk Road. And she joins us now to tell us about her adventure. Hi.
Hi.
It's so nice to meet you, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
So you and your friend Mel decide to go on a bike trip. You're actually cycling. You cycled 10,000 kilometers over 10 months, 10 different countries. Do you know that saying?
Right.
Like, you know, when you travel with somebody, that's when it either breaks or makes the relationship?
Yes.
Are you and Mel still friends?
We are still friends. It's kind of a miracle. We still get along. I think even before we left on this trip, we were almost like siblings.
Yeah.
You know, we grew up together and we get in fights and then it blows over.
So big question is, why do this?
Yeah, that is a really good question. You know, it's honestly a question I asked more about writing the book, which I found much harder. But the trip itself, as a kid, I always wanted to be an explorer. And, you know, I'd read books about Marco Polo and Shackleton and Nansen, these hardcore types who went out in the world to unknown to them lands and came back to tell the tale. And I thought the only way to do that in this sort of mapped and tamed, seemingly tamed world of ours was to become a scientist and literally discover new things in a laboratory, but ideally out in the world. And so I was on a path to study biology and geology at a pretty intense level. And at some point, I just realized I was spending more and more time in a laboratory, you know, messing around with test tubes and petri dishes. And it didn't have that feeling of adventure and exploration that I dreamed of.
But why bicycles?
Bicycles struck me as an incredible way to explore the world under your own power. It's a really democratic way of seeing the world. You know, people bike everywhere. In every country you go to, there will be other people riding bikes to get places. And so you can kind of blend in. And you can go places that the tourist buses won't go.
Did you train?
We didn't train. We trained by bulking up on sweets mostly as an excuse because we'd be burning so many calories over the coming year. But before that, you know, I'd been really into bike racing actually when I was in grad school. So I hoped that muscle memory would come back to save me.
And does it feel weird now to not have to do that every day?
Oh, it's a relief. I mean, waking up and setting off whatever the weather, you know, however you felt with head cold or worse, just needing to cover ground, in part because visas would impose really strict limitations on how long we could spend in each country. So we'd be forced to cover ground each day.
Because you had to move on.
Yeah.
So when you were 17, you write a letter and you send it to 22 world leaders, as you do at 17. What did the letter say?
Yeah, so when I was a teenager, I looked around at this world and thought it was done with as far as exploration was concerned. And so I figured my only chance left in the solar system was Mars, our neighboring planet. And it really thrilled me as a place that people could not only go and walk around and leave footprints and plant flags in the sort of traditional explorer sense, which I'm not about anymore. But it was this other world that could potentially harbor signs of life. You know, it used to have a warmer, wetter past like the Earth. So it captured my imagination as a teenager, and I decided that was where I had to go to be an explorer.
And so you write this letter, and is that what the letter says?
Yeah, so I wrote this letter. There was a contest run by the Mars Society called the Hacklet Prize, and they were calling for letters from students advocating for the exploration and eventual settlement of Mars. So you were supposed to write a letter promoting this idea. And Richard Hacklet was, he wasn't an explorer himself, but he was responsible for urging a lot of the exploration of the North Americas, of Canada and what is now Canada and the US, you know, to the detriment of the people already living here. So as a kid, I didn't question any of that sort of those colonial associations with exploration. It was just...
To you, it was a contest, something that you were interested in.
Yeah, I thought was cool. So I wrote this letter, I sent it to 22 world leaders. I was a real fanatic and zealot about going to Mars. And most of them didn't write back. I got a few like form letters, but it was...
But then what happened after that?
Well, I won this contest, and I got to go to the Mars Society annual convention and read my manifesto in front of an audience of scientists and engineers. And it really felt like this was it. This is the path I am meant to be on. I'm not alone in longing for another world. And the way to get there is to be a scientist.
How close did you come to becoming an astronaut?
Well, I did apply to the Canadian Space Program, but I didn't even meet the basic qualifications at that point. I was in grad school studying the history of science, and I had an undergraduate degree in science, but I didn't have a master's degree in science proper, which is sort of the minimum you need to apply. But I applied anyway, just to show a pattern of commitment. And you know, so then I went on to grad school to study science after that first degree, and that's when it really hit me that I didn't want to be cooped up inside. And I had done this previous sort of Mars simulation in Utah called, it's the Mars Desert Research Station, and you can apply to be a crew member there, and for 2 weeks you sort of go through the motions of being on another world. And it was really neat, you know.
Did you like it though?
I liked it on many levels. Like, it was kind of this big game of make-believe that you're on Mars. You're looking through this visor of a fake space helmet, and the Utah landscape looks like Mars. And it was neat, but I really grew disconcerted by the distance between me and the world around me. You know, when you wear a spacesuit, you see the sort of reflection of your visor wherever you look. When you reach out and touch canyon walls, you can't feel the landscape, you feel your glove. And it began to hit me then that the sort of remove of exploring through a spacesuit was not suited to
And
me.
that's when you realized that your first dream of being an explorer wasn't such a bad idea after all.
Yeah, so I decided to go the old school route and just set off to lands, you know, old to others but new to me, and try and write about it.
And you're related to an explorer, right? William Clark of Lewis and Clark fame?
This is the family legend. Apparently it's on my father's side, and I don't think it's a blood descendant. I believe some ancestor married in to the William.
Close enough.
It's close enough. I was so thrilled. My grandmother, who's since passed away, she told me that when I was younger, and that just really made an impression on me. Like, oh, this is...
Well, you made this really interesting observation. You write, many praise explorers, but they don't realize that some find routine more terrifying than risk. Was that the same for you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, people are in awe of you know, the trip my buddy Mel and I did and the risks we took, but honestly, I find it far more terrifying to know exactly what's going to happen day in, day out, to have a set routine, and a whole life can disappear in that. You know, you can just go through the motions of making coffee and going off to work and doing work and coming home and repeat the next day. And I find that just personally really stultifying. I love surprise. I love seeing around the bend. Writing is an amazing excuse to travel and get to know people and constantly challenge the way you see things, you know, the sort of narrow views you might have. I love that about writing. You know, it's world expanding, just sitting at your desk trying to think through things. And then my desk is in a tiny little cabin in northern BC on the edge of the Yukon and Alaska. And you know, my closest neighbors are grizzlies and caribou. So I step out the door there, and it's living an adventure. So I feel really lucky. I've sort of extracted the like grueling day in, day out biking in any weather elements of the Silk Road.
Put the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
So this wasn't the first time that you had been to the Silk Road.
That's right.
Why go back?
Well, so the first trip, my friend Melissa and I, we had just graduated university, and we wanted to have a grand adventure. And I was lucky enough that at my university they had, through the scholarship that I won to go there, which paid for my entire education. It's called the Moorhead Kane Scholarship. And any kids out there, like, run with this opportunity because it's extraordinary. But they pay for your education, and every summer you get to do some kind of different travel experience. And for your final summer, you can pitch, like just dream up whatever you want to explore. And they'll cut you a check for, you know, a couple grand to get you a plane ticket there.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I wanted to hit the Silk Road, and I wanted to travel the lands Marco Polo had written about and inspired me as a kid, but sort of look at them in a different way. And I remember, I think I emailed Mel, and I was like, you want to bike the Silk Road? And neither of us at that point had bikes or had ever done anything like this. And one thing I love about Mel is that she's game for anything. And she really means it. When she says yes, she will follow through. I think she bought a bike before I did.
Well, you write in the book, the Silk Road is old news now, fable uncombed from fact. Once a dynamic flux of trade and ideas between Europe and Asia, this bygone caravan route now mostly traffics in drugs and violence at worst, myths and souvenirs at best. Where's Mel and I hope to avoid as we set off down it on bicycles. Knowing that it could possibly be dangerous, you are now back on the bikes and back on the road. What did those first few moments feel like for you?
Oh, terrifying and exhilarating. I really distinctly remember getting off the ferry. So we started in Istanbul. We flew to Istanbul and you know, packed up our bikes, spent about a week sort of getting over jet lag and buying food and getting ready to actually go. And I think from the first pedal stroke, it was just like sheer terror and disbelief that we could actually do this because our bikes were so heavy.
And you had supplies and...
Supplies, and we filmed the entire thing as well. So we had camera gear and yeah, we were just like severely burdened. And it turned out to be, we were kind of planning for not many resupplies along the way. Little did we realize that, you know, every half hour we'd pass through a Turkish town with a grocery store and
you'd need something.
Yeah.
On the map there we saw there were broken lines. Those were where you couldn't bike across, right?
That's right.
Why not?
There were a few different circumstances that forced us off the bikes along the way. In one case, the police in Turkey would not let us bike through this snowstorm up a pass, probably for good reason. It was like raining at the bottom and snowing heavily at the top, and we were soaked at the bottom, and that would have frozen as we got higher, and so they forced us to take a ride with them, which we weren't too disappointed about.
I was going to say, I have a feeling that if they didn't force you, you probably would have tried it.
We would have tried it. We would have been miserable.
Yeah. What are some of the other challenges that you faced on the trip?
Yeah. So in terms of not being able to bike, traffic was really, really scary in some places. Basically, every city as you entered it, you know, Tbilisi in Georgia or into Baku in Azerbaijan, the traffic would just be insane, you know, murderous. So I know, like, coming into Baku, we caught a ride, and then the big dotted lines on the map were due to visa challenges. We couldn't travel across the Caspian Sea, obviously, on bikes, so we took a plane. And then from there, we hoped to bike into Uzbekistan and into Central Asia, but we didn't have an Uzbek visa. It was denied. So we had to go all the way across Kazakhstan by train, and it's something like 7,200 kilometers round trip there and back to get this visa in the one city that was issuing it, back to where we got off the plane and then continued by bike.
And when you were on the train, you didn't have food?
Yeah. We language was probably the biggest challenge of the trip, just communicating basics. So, you know, we bought the train tickets. We asked the woman, like, are there meals included with this, like meals served? Because that's often the case in India and on trains. And so we kind of assumed that would be it. And she was like, like, yes, for sure. And she clearly did not understand our question. She probably heard, is there food on the train? Which there is. There's a food wagon. But we didn't bring any. And so we had 3 days we had very little money at that point and no food.
Well, the people on the train were very generous.
Incredibly generous.
They shared their food with you, and
we saw all these families around us pulling out feasts like goat's head casserole soup things and cutlery and real plates, and we were like, oh, they are not serving food on this train, but they shared it with us. So
I want to show a clip from your trip, but you were filming it yourselves. It was just the two of you. I mean, you got people coming in and meeting you sometimes, but how did you film yourselves?
Well, in a way, we kind of biked the Silk Road twice. Like, one of us would bike ahead, set up the camera on a tripod, bike back, we'd both bike past it, and then we'd retrieve the camera. It's pretty absurd.
Wow. Let's take a look at a clip from your adventures on the Silk Road.
Everything we own is already soaking, except for our sleeping bags. The idea of being out in this all day, every day, probably for the next 10 days according to the weather forecast, is pretty depressing.
Oh dear. What do you want? I have nothing to give you.
I mean, just watching that, I want to give up for you. How did you deal with the elements?
Oh, it was pretty brutal at first. I mean, we brought clothes in theory for all weather, you know, rain, shine, freeze, heat, but Gore-Tex can only absorb so much, or rather not absorb so much rain before it just soaks right through, and everything would be soaked when we set off in Turkey. It was winter on the Black Sea coast, which is not, there's a reason people don't go there for a holiday at that time of year. And it actually got easier as we got higher into the mountains and it began to be snow because you don't get soaked. You can.
How about the altitude though?
Yeah, that, in part, traveling by bicycle, you move so slowly that you can't really rush and gain great altitude. So generally, like when we were biking up onto the Tibetan Plateau, it was staged. And we were very careful not to gain more than like 300 meters in a day of altitude if we weren't coming back down again right away.
In the passage I read earlier, I mentioned danger. Were you ever in physical danger or felt intimidated by the authorities or anything like that?
Physical danger, transport trucks were a constant concern, just because the roads are so narrow and they're not used to seeing cyclists on certain roads, for sure. I never felt threatened by people, which I feel like everyone's kind of surprised by that, but we were just treated incredibly well the whole way, and we were very careful. You know, if a mother with 2 kids invited us to come home, then we'd probably go. But if it was sort of a man with vodka on his breath, we wouldn't accept his invitation of hospitality. So we were just really selective in who we open our journey into. And
what about getting across borders? Because the book opens, the scene that it opens with is you're sneaking under barbed wire at night. I mean, was there any danger with that?
Probably, yeah. That was, and it turned out it was completely unnecessary on that first trip, which was the sort of
because you were in Tibet, right?
Yeah, so we were in China, in Xinjiang in Western China, and we were trying to bike into Tibet, what is now the Tibetan Autonomous Region within China. And this was the first checkpoint on the way in, and we'd heard from other cyclists that you have to sneak through. Like, they will not let you in there without permits, and they won't give you permits unless you have a guide that accompanies you. And we could neither afford a guide and, you know, permits for the length of trip we were planning. And we also didn't want to support what China is doing in Tibet by paying them, the Chinese government, to see Tibet. So sneaking in was our only option. So Mel and I, in the cover of darkness, you know, ducked under this guardrail on the edge of the Tibetan Autonomous Region. And it was all very terrifying, and, you know, dogs barking and lights going on and us taking off into the night. But it turned out, like 2 days later, some friends we'd been biking with but had gotten separated from just went through in broad daylight, and the guards did not care. I don't regret doing it because it led me on such a different path. I mean, the fact that that border didn't exist effectively for foreigners, you know, that the guardrail was there to stop Tibetans from leaving and to stop Xinjiang, the ethnic minority there is the Uyghurs, or majority there rather, from going in. So it was for local people, and that's a hard and heartbreaking realization that, I mean, you just see how you have a passport that means more than the people you're traveling, whose country you're traveling through.
Is that when
so
you
that was-
realize you're privileged? Because I mean, you have a
Yeah.
Canadian passport. You can probably go. We can go anywhere really
You
in
can
the
go
world.
anywhere. Yeah, and certainly, I mean, you as a Canadian, you know, if you get into some ill-advised skirmish, you know, you've got an embassy with some power to back you up. You've got an escape route, basically. And so traveling through these places where people, you know, the very people that are taking you into their homes and being so generous with food and hospitality, these are the people that couldn't leave if they wanted to. That's a very eye-opening thing. It was for me at that point in my life, and it got me fascinated with borders. You know, what are these lines we draw in the sand and then, you know, reinforce with guns and violence, and how can we erase them? How can we think beyond them?
I want to show another clip from your travels, and this
Okay.
one is of the Tibetan pilgrims that you came upon. Let's take a look. What were they doing?
So they were prostrating themselves to Lhasa, and they'd been on the road, from what we could gather, given language barriers, for something like 3 months from Golmud, outside of Tibet, heading to the holiest city in Tibet, which is Lhasa. And prostrating meaning like every footstep is a form of prayer, and there's a very repetitive sequence of movements they would go through. You probably saw the dark spots on their forehead, and it's like a callus from where they're rubbing their head against the road.
And as you're watching them, what did you realize in that moment?
Well, so Mel and I we were disguised as Chinese people to travel through Tibet, and that was sort of a huge compromise we willingly took on, because there was no other way of getting in and traveling with as much freedom as we wanted. We wanted to see the China didn't want us to see. So we were wearing face masks, we were flying Chinese flags on our bikes. We looked like very nationalistic Chinese cyclists. So when you approach two Tibetans who are living in an oppressive situation, an oppressive regime, who are moving through the world with such trust and wonder,
And there's traffic, the cars are just
whizzing by, and it's an unglamorous road, as you saw, narrow 2-lane paved highway with power lines running alongside it, and yet they're making it holy with their movements. It was a moment of incredible hope and heartbreak. I love the fact that right now, as we're sitting here and talking about this, people are out there doing that. What a wild world that these different realities exist at the same time, and that people are undertaking pilgrimages for all kinds of reasons.
And along the trip too, you and Mel were very aware of the ecology on your route. What do you want people to understand about that part of the trip?
Yeah, well, I wanted in part to explore some of the unexpected ways borders, it's easy to rail against borders, which I do often, but they do serve administrative purposes, which obviously is helpful. And in some strange cases, they actually help wildlife and wild places flourish. So we went to a few places along the Silk Road that, because of the barbed wire erected and because people are forbidden from going in the border zone, wildlife has moved back in, endangered species are flourishing. And so you see, first of all, you see wildlife ignoring our borders, and then you see them benefiting from borders, as if it creates this sort of inadvertent wildlife sanctuary. And so I thought that was really neat. And it's a good lesson too I think what I want to push back against with this book and generally is simple or simplistic thinking. you know, the world is more complex than we can imagine. We're more interconnected and tied in with each other than we can imagine. And just when you form an opinion that you think is solid, there will be something in the world that pulls that foundation out from under you. And I think that's a beautiful thing. Like, embrace ambiguity, embrace complexity, and
Embrace
borders,
the unknown.
Borders are part of that. Embrace the unknown.
Well, you also note that for exploration to matter, it's important to share the tale. Was that part of the motivation to write the book?
Absolutely, yeah. And I started writing. You know, I was on the science path, but then I got the scholarship and had the chance to travel suddenly every summer, and I'd been nowhere. I hadn't even seen a mountain or a desert or a glacier. And then suddenly, every summer, I could pick and choose what I wanted to explore. And so I would write these long emails or blog posts to friends and family back home, because that was how I traveled the world, like vicariously through words. As a kid, I always had my nose stuck in a book, usually, you know, travel or exploration book, and it just felt like that's what you do. If you're fortunate enough to be able to see the wonders of the world, then I feel like you have an obligation to share it, bring others along.
Would you and Mel do this again, and where would you go?
We've joked about when we're like 75, retracing the Silk Road by scooter, motor scooter.
By scooter, I was going to say.
Yeah.
But
No more
knowing you
pedaling.
too, who knows, right? You could
Who
be on those
knows?
bikes and, you know, still do it.
Maybe.
It's been such a pleasure. And thank you for taking us on your
Yeah.
adventure with us.
Thanks
It's been
for
a
your
pleasure talking
interest.
to you.
Wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks,
Nan.
Kate.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.